Okay, so I got a call on a weekend night, I guess, and maybe it was a bunch of white guys that were drinking and having fun, whatever, getting drunk. And they called my room and they said everything that you could think of, from I'll hang your mom to I'll castrate you and hang you from a tree and burn you and nigger this, nigger that, and everything you could think of. And I was like, wow.
Bless this soil, bless this earth, blessed with rhymes fit forever.
Controversial, I'm political, somewhat subliminal, philanthropic, nonconformist, so I'm criminal, I'm a criminal.
Did you hurt me? Don't be scared, see. When it all goes down, I'll be there.
There he is, IronE Singleton, still with us.
Drop that load, pack your dreams, and fly high with me. Fly high with me.
Hello world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Depending on where you are, of course. But hey, welcome to another episode of Blind Side of the Walking Dead. I am your host, IronE Singleton, along with my amazing co-host here, Coming in Singleton.
Hello, everybody.
All right, it's great to have you here with us today. Now, there were three things that we're just going to get right to it. We have a limited amount of time to talk about a subject that we could talk about for another century or so.
You think a century?
I think so. At least a century nonstop. But there were three things that my professor, one or a few of my professors told me in college that are the big three and that you should avoid at all costs. But because I'm IronE Singleton, irony, that which is not expected, you wouldn't expect that, so I give it to you. But they are race, religion, and politics. So today our subject is race.
Ah.
That dreaded four-letter word.
Great to know. Yeah, all I got today, of course, was that it's going to be heavy.
Yeah, heavy subject for a lot of people, but not for us, because we have this discussion, but it seems as though a lot of times the world is not ready for it, more particularly in America, but then the rest of the world too. They have their issues related to race, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of that today. Now, I'm going to give a quick history lesson. I'm not a history guru or anything like that, but I want to start from the beginning and try to bring us up really an abridged Cliff's Notes version of how we got to where we are. So, hundreds of thousands of years ago, there was what's called the cyanobacteria. According to my studies, our studies at the university, as they would say in Canada, the university. You're going to university, but cyanobacteria, which developed in the ocean, and because the Earth is comprised mostly of water, 70% water, like our bodies, and there's a connection there. There's God always at work. Beautiful thing about God.
Yes,
God makes everything work. Everything works in sync, right?
Yes. Everything
is intertwined, just like we as humans are, along with nature. But then this cyanobacteria grew into the bacteria, right, which grew. It was one cell organism that grew into 2 cells, which grew into 4 cells, which grew into 8 cells, and 16 and 32, 64, 128, 256, 512.
Okay. He's a numbers guy. He can go on and on.
So you see that I have a fascination with numbers, I'm sorry. But so you see the exponential growth there, and that's what happened, and that's how the first living creature came about. And then those creatures, that creature that was created in the water, this living, breathing creature, came out of that water, and it was a dual threat, if you will. It could survive in water and on land. That's where we got our amphibian. And then from the amphibian, got to the point to where it's like, you know what, I'm not going in that water anymore. Whatever that creature was, said, I'm not going in that water anymore. I'm staying right here on the land. So then it became a full-time mammal. You have dolphins that are mammals also. But then we have the land terrestrials. So that's how we got to where we have land creatures. And then from there, we have the human being. This took place right around the area of Africa or so. because that's where it is. That's where I think we're all at agreement that civilization or life began there, the first human being, near the tropics, the tropics, if you will. And so this individual, or these creatures, ended up migrating. So, like I said, I'm giving the Cliff's Notes version. So please, when you leave your critique, don't try to correct me on certain things, but you can give clarification, but don't say I was wrong on this or that, because I'm leaving out certain parts. So I'm skipping all the way through the evolution of all of the little critters and creatures and big creatures onto man. That's the evolution. So we're going to have religious people. They're going to contact us and they're going to say, okay, well, Adam and Eve, we can work Adam and Eve into that equation. No problem. Adam and Eve, we working there somewhere. So I think we can have evolution and religion to coincide, like you said, right? Mm-hmm. Coincide. It all works together. But that's not the focus of today. Focus of today is to discuss race and how we can become better as a people and dealing with this race issue as we should, and not try to avoid it or circumvent it. So human beings, we're human beings now, right? All right, the humans are here. So humans started to migrate to different parts of the world. There was a certain darker complexion human being that started to migrate to different parts of the Eastern Hemisphere. And some went to Europe, some went to Asia. And depending on and we talked about that in I think a previous episode. And depending on the climate, that determined the features of the individuals. And that's how we got to the point to where there were heads of state, because greed crept into this thing now. I'm going to move into, say, prior to the Dark Ages. And it could be known for Dark Ages for more than one reason. We're talking about like the Moors, where the darker people of the world rule. So we'll step in right there and rule the Northern Africa, Middle Eastern region of the world, European part of the world, Spain, Portugal. And from there, the Europeans started to rule from that moment. Now, it got to a point to where greed became so huge. Greed has always been a part of our DNA. So it's a matter of how do we deal with this? That's one of our ills of society. And I think that was one of our earlier type of sins of society, greed. And so this greed led to heads of state thinking that, hey, you know what? It's a pretty good idea to go, the European heads of state said, it's a pretty good idea to go to Africa and to get some African human beings and transport them, not just to different places throughout Europe, but transport them to the Western Hemisphere. When the Western Hemisphere was discovered, of course, in 1492, we understand the story behind that. And so Christopher Columbus was given credit for discovering America, which was already here, because we all know that the Native Americans were here, and transported the Africans through purchase and through abduction. So some other Africans sold Africans, and we also know that some Africans were abducted by Europeans and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to what's known today as the Americas, all up and down the American coast, all up and throughout the Caribbean, and even South America, Brazil, and all the way as far south, I think, as Brazil, and all the way up. And it was supported through literature and through heads of state. Even the Pope had a hand in claiming that, well, there were darker people of the world that were not as human, if you will. They were inferior to the lighter race of people. And that's where I think the passion crept in with the greed. So now we have not just greed, but we have passion. Passion and greed are our two biggest nemesis, I think. And the thing that could counter those two things would be truth and love. So now we have the passion that comes into play, because the normal average human beings are now being controlled and programmed by the monolith, the people in power. People in power say that these darker people are not as as smart as you. They're not as brilliant as you are. And so that was used as part of the ploy to justify they're not as human as you are. And that was used as part of the ploy to, as part of the plan to dehumanize these darker people so that slavery could be justified. And not just slavery, it wasn't just like a servitude where they were just working for another person or the slave master, but it took on another shape because of the dehumanization of these darker people that were here in the Americas. And that is what justified the brutal treatment and the harsh treatment of these darker people. And so now we're going to fast forward past that into the modern age. And we have throughout our American history, so hopefully you everyone abroad, you'll be able to kind of go with us on this ride as I get more specific and talk about American history. And so we've had, since slavery, since the Emancipation Proclamation of 1865, we've had different laws put into place to make sure that the wealth is protected, if you will, and that the lighter people, white people, have to benefit more so that they're able to benefit more than darker people. And throughout the Reconstruction period, we've had racism to be a part of the equation, so to justify certain treatment of individuals, thereby allowing lighter colored people, white people, to hold on to their wealth. And now we go through the Jim Crow era, we go through all the way through all those periods right there, and we land here today in 2019. And we still have those issues that persist in our society. And now it's a matter of how do we deal with our sometimes brutal history. I think the key is to actually recognize our oneness with each other, because see, you go all the way back to the beginning, we're talking about us being one. We all started in the same place. And I know everybody has their own theories about, who's the original man and who's human and who's not human. I think that's a bunch of prop, because we all bleed the same. We all have, unless there are some difficulties or, we all have two legs, we all have two arms, we all have two eyes, we're all human. So I think that it's a matter of us acknowledging that and understanding that in order for us to be able to have compassion for one another, accept one another as equals, and so that we can, move forward and not forget our past, but forgive what has happened in the past, but not forget it so that it won't happen again. But there was a meme that was floating about. And the thing that made me think about race was there was a meme that was circulating that took the shape of two human beings, but they were put together in the form of all the states of America. And one of our senators, I think, circulated it or was responsible for circulating it. And it showed these two human beings that were in the shape of these, of an amalgamation of states. And one of those human beings was blue and the other was red. So it was like a battle between red states and blue states. And the meme had beneath it, we will win, meaning the red states will win, talking about Republicans, because we have over 8 or 9 trillion bullets, and the blue states, they don't even know where the bathroom is. And I thought that was a really sad depiction of who we are as human beings, because if we're thinking that the only way that we can solve our problem is through bloodshed, then we're in a lot of trouble because we know that it has not solved anything in the past. We know from even our Civil War in America in 1861 through 65.
Yeah, war never solves anything. War only ensues fear and hate and resentment. And eventually, the people who, quote unquote, loses the war eventually will, if not themselves, translate that hate and that fear and that rage into their offspring and their offspring. And it's something that will continually just boil until it ruptures over into another retaliation and more war. And so we've talked about, I guess, I know that you have consistently in most of everything that you've shared and posted. I don't get on social media as much as you, and for different reasons, but the consistent message is that, love conquers all, that you can't conquer hate with hate. And it's unfortunate that it's not an easy solution. We know, we're not naive enough to think that right here where we are in the current state of our world, our nation primarily, that we are able to resolve all issues very easily without there being, just more violence, more bloodshed. It's unfortunate. I wish there were a solution, but we're in so deep. But a start is for us to consistently promote and for us to consistently practice and preach the ideology of understanding and empathy and love and reasoning. And it starts with, open dialogue and open heart communication about these things that run so deeply, which is why I'm interested to know the outcome of where we go with this race conversation, because it's a much needed conversation to be had. It's not something that we should run away from or shy from. I think that if people come to the table when they're ready to discuss race, politics, and religion with a heart filled with good intent and love, then and open-mindedness, of course, and empathy, we can expect that we're going to have a great outcome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think you talk about the people that lose this battle. I think the people that lose would be all of us. I mean,
right.
we all would be
lose
losers
in the end. That's
in
right.
the end.
And that's why I said quote unquote.
Yeah.
That
So we would all lose in the end. And now to discuss the issues of the day, because a lot of people are like, well, okay, we'll talk about racism today. Okay, racism exists. And what Commaleta and I do is, if there's not a blatant case of racism, like there's some black people we talk to, and they may be some black people, not all black people. So black people be like, no, that's not me. But some black people we've talked to, they're quick to raise the issue of race, and they say it's racism that caused a white person to respond to them the way they did. And it's like, not necessarily. It's like, did they call you nigger? No. Okay. Did they? And I know there are other ways to express racism, but did they say they want to lynch you? No. Well, now they said, well, it was just their behavior. It was just their attitude towards me. Okay, maybe that person just had an awful day. Maybe they had a bad day.
Or an awful upbringing.
Or they had an awful upbringing and they're just a bitter person. Awful experiences, right?
Yeah.
So Commaleta and I have made up our minds to say we're not going to call something racism if it's not blatant racism. Like, if they have a nasty attitude towards me, then that's what I'll chalk it up to. But guess what? Just like racism is one of the sins of society, that's one of the sins of our world. Sexism is one of the sins of our world. Ageism. You can throw some phobias in there. You can throw transphobia in there. The hate of gay people, or the homophobia, right? Homophobia. So you can throw some phobias and some isms in there. We got that. Those are all part of the sins of society. But for us to jump to race so quickly, I just think that we shouldn't do that. And I think that that's where we go wrong. I think that that's where we swerve off the path of communication. Good, sound communication. And because the other side just kind of shuts down perhaps, and they can't hear anything because now it's like, oh, I'm a racist. Oh. And so we try to avoid going down that path unless we have to. And if we go down that path, then we're able to have that conversation sensibly, logically, with an open mind because, you know, we know how to discuss it without getting angry. And when people get angry, then people start talking through each other and yelling at each other.
You know what? And I know that time is very limited, but I think that this is a great interjection of the run-in that you had with the cop many years ago in Hiram, Georgia, when we were there. Just to make a long story short, and maybe we'll put up a link to, let's put up a link to the document that you wrote to the officer. But the long story short, IronE was called out at a movie theater for trying to see multiple movies. A cop pulled him out of the movie and had a conversation. Well, it wasn't a conversation. It was more of like of an interrogation and just a disrespectful moment of slew of insults that he threw at you that were clearly in our mind at the end of that in the end of that confrontation were definitely hints of racism.
Well, not in our mind, but just it was racist. It was a racist encounter.
Yes,
because,
it was, and everything about it felt that way. And I'll let you, this is your story.
Well, I was headed there, and you took us on there. You sped up. I was going 30. I was cruising. Then you said,
sorry. I hit the gas.
Right, she hit that gas, and
that's what I tend to do.
That's how she drives, though, for real. She drives like that. For real. So she took us there, and I was planning on giving examples of racism that I experienced, so that I can call it exactly what it is, as opposed to speculating as to what it is. And I think that's what we should do. Just because somebody is of a different race as we are, a different color, then I just don't think we should be quick to call something racist. It's like, okay, what if you had that encounter with somebody that is your color, is your hue? Then when you call it racism, you say, no, I call it colorism. So we got to shake that. I think maybe that's part of a bitterness that resides in all of us that wants to jump to the negative with something like that. But to give you these examples, when I was in college, I started college.
Can I just make one more point with that story? So I was saying that to say,
I'm coming back to it though.
Okay,
See, this is a century-long conversation, right?
It is.
All right, go ahead.
But it was a very scary situation. So much so, he was on a bicycle at the time. And I went to pick him up because he didn't feel safe traveling home. The cop had actually, in a very subtle way, threatened him. But with all of that, later on, after he conducted himself in a way that was very, you're like, stop, because I want to tell you.
Because I'm coming.
You're coming back.
I'm going to whip that thing back around.
What seemed to be a racist person. Okay. And I'm going to leave it there.
I'm going to whip that thing.
I'm going to let him whip it, guys. I'm going to hold him to it. I'm going to hold him to it.
Okay,
let's go.
All right,
wait for you to whip
all right, so in college, I had two very distinct racist encounters. One was my first year. And even though this happened at UGA, I love UGA. UGA is where I became a man. I don't label the entire institution based upon two experiences I've had. And the message I want to say is that don't label our country, because I think our country is a beautiful place. I love my country. I love other places too, and I love my country too. But I won't label my country based upon some bad experiences that we've had. Now, it was a lot worse, and we've gotten better over time, and we've continued to grow. So let's continue to grow and be better and not take everything or so much as negativity as opposed to positivity. So let's focus on that. Okay, so I got a call on a weekend night, I guess, and maybe it was a bunch of white guys that were drinking and having fun or whatever, getting drunk. And they called my room, and they said everything that you could think of, from I'll hang your mom to I'll castrate you and hang you from a tree and burn you and nigger this, nigger that, and everything you could think of. And I was like, wow. And I was so angry at the time, I wanted to find out who it was. And I say a bunch of guys, but I don't know for sure. It was only one person saying that. But generally when people want to be knuckleheads, on a weekend and, they're drinking or whatever, normally it's not one person by himself. or herself. There has to be a group because there's a group think going on, and then they think that it's it's a fun thing. They think it's something cool or fun to do that, when it's not, because it's hurtful. It hurts the people on the other end of that, on the receiving end. So
and not
be
just
mindful of
those
that.
people, but we have to understand that our actions cause reactions, and it is something that permeates through the world, because every person is interconnected. And so you may lash out on one person, that may then go out and lash out on 2 or 3 more people, that may then go out and lash out on 5 or 6 more people. And so we have to understand that the energy that we put in the world, it replicates.
It's a ripple effect.
It is.
It is a ripple effect, yes. And so that created, that fomented anger in me. And I knew at that time, having come from the projects, having come from the ghetto, having seen and experienced what I had experienced. I had moments in high school, but I don't want to touch on the high school stuff. But I said, in order for me to be better, in order for me to grow, I had already lost my mom 3 years prior to that. And God told me, in order to be a better person, I have to give everybody truth and love. I have to speak truth and love into the world. And so that was a moment of epiphany for me. And I said, I can't let this get the best of me. But fast forward, a year later, a roommate of mine called me a monkey. Just to make a long story short, called me a monkey because I took his books. Now, that was a bully move on my part. But what happened really quickly is that I was studying when he came into the room earlier that night, around 8 or 9 o'clock that night. And he left the room. Well, he came in and he lay down. And I guess he was trying to get a nap or whatever, and I didn't think twice about it. I didn't have a night lamp so that I could study with. And so he got up and he left later on, maybe an hour afterwards. And then when I went to bed, he came back in around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So he started to study, and then he turned on the big light, the room light, when he had a night lamp. And I asked him to turn it off, and he persisted in turning the light back on. I asked him to turn it off. He didn't turn it off. I got down off the loft. And when it turned the light off, I got back in the loft, he turned the light back on. I got back down, turned the light off, said, don't turn the light back on.
You said a long story short.
I know, it's long story short. All right. So I got back in the bed, he came back over, he turned the light back on, I got down, took his books. Shouldn't have done that, but I was upset they had on light because he had a night lamp. I said, why don't you turn on your night lamp? And he was like, well, you had the light on when I was here earlier. I said, the only thing you had to do was ask me. I said, but I don't have a night lamp. I said, but all you had to do was ask me. It was earlier. It was an appropriate time to study. Like I said, it was around 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I said, and you didn't communicate that. You didn't say anything. He said, well, I'm saying it now. And he kept the light on. So I took his books, got back in my loft, and that's when he called me a monkey. So I think he understood the historical ramifications of something like that. He understood I guess he understood the history behind it, because he was a 4.4 GPA. And for you to call a black person a monkey suggests so many other things. I was like, whoa, and I got down and I pretended like I was going to punch him. It was, and in the process of doing that, he put his legs up to try to stop me from what he thought was going to be a punch, and he kneed himself in the mouth. And he bled, and when he got to RA, RA came back, wrote us both up. We ended up at a tribunal, and we had to explain the situation. They put us both on probation. I said, man, I can't continue on this path because I'll end up back in the projects, because I knew my situation was different from other people. I was like, my situation, I don't have anybody to go to bat for me. I don't have those connections or anything like that. So we dealt with that situation. He moved out. You would have gone to bat for me, baby? I know you would. I know you probably would. But no, you would have, but not physically though, because that's never been you. That's never been your style.
I'm gonna tell you.
So that was a learning experience.
Why you call me out like that on camera though? I mean,
well, you ain't about,
I'm not a thing.
So, but anyways, I think that you have the potential, given your background, where you come from. I think
I've never had to do
right. You had 1 or 2 fights in your life though, so that's about it though.
Yeah.
1 or 2 or 3. All right, so fast forwarding to 2006, and this is when I had the confrontation with the police officer, and the police officer told me, he introduced me to a new term, and it's called hayseeds. I had no clue what a hayseed was, and I said, what is a hayseed? After he had already degraded me so much, he used, these colloquialisms that would normally be attributed to like a black person saying, like, homie, homeboy. And he was using that type of language as a police officer to converse with me. And I thought it wasn't a conversation, it was just him degrading me, basically. And I was just there listening in the cold. It was wintertime. I was freezing, and I asked him if I could go back inside. He wouldn't allow me to go back inside. If you want to know the beginning of that story, I'll be willing to, but not here because we're running short on time. All right. Okay. So you're gonna share the letter. We'll share the letter then. All right. And so he said, "Hey, Season." I said, "Sir, I don't." And I was very respectful throughout because I wanted to live. And I said, I was angry on the inside, but I was more sad for him. Like there has to be a lot of anger and bitterness inside of him for him to speak to me the way he's speaking to me, because I had already expressed myself. I was like, I'm a business owner in the county. I'm a contributing citizen to our county and to society. He was like, "I don't care to hear that," and he cursed me out. He was cursing me, and it seemed as though he was trying to provoke me, but there was no way he could provoke me because I had been through some stuff in life, and I knew that God had that battle. So I was like, well, that's not going to happen. And he explained to me that a hayseed was somebody that wanted it to be the way it was in the past, back in the 50s and 60s. He said, "Oh, you don't know a hayseed?" He said, "A hayseed is somebody that would love for it to be the way it was in the 50s and 60s. I was like, whoa. So that told me everything I needed to know. And I was in a county that it was maybe 5 to 10% black. Not many minorities lived in the county at that time. Not at that time. It was about 15 years ago.
So 2006 is when it happened? We moved there in 2003.
We moved there in 2003, but it happened in 2006. Yes. And so I called my wife because I was afraid for my life.
Dream is what it's all about. White picket fence, a couple of whips, a couple of chicks, a couple of flicks. I'm for sure that the vision of Moses was not really about keeping up with the Joneses. From me to you, you better know this, man. Let my people go, go, go.
I'm eccentric, controversial, I'm political, somewhat subliminal, philanthropic, nonconformist, so I'm criminal.